Let's have a look at these new climate protesters, because something is disturbed about many of them. Now, in a way, you can't really blame some of these young protesters for being so convinced that the world is about to end that they've got to do something, anything, to stop people using coal, gas and oil. They've got to save lives. And you can't blame them because people in authority are lying to them. Here's the United Nations Secretary General lying, and I do mean lying, at the UN Climate Summit in Egypt this week.
We are in the fight of our lives, and we are losing. We are on a highway to climate hell. Humanity has a choice: cooperate or perish. It is either a climate solidarity pact or a collective suicide pact.
That is total bull. We're not certainly all about to die at all. In fact, one of the top climate scientists in the world, Judith Curry, says it's not difficult to understand why the world is in such a mess with so-called leaders from the UN spewing apocalyptic nonsense like that. The truth is, of course, we're living longer and we're less likely than ever to die in climate-related disasters. We're growing more food than ever. That orange line is the world's grain production. But the ABC today, same thing, same reckless doom-mongering. Global warming is drowning our Pacific neighbours.
Leaders from their nations are negotiating action on a climate emergency. Vanuatu's Special Envoy for Climate Change, Pakoa Kautonga, warns time is running out to save island homes, and he's calling on Australia to back a loss and damage fund to help pay for the devastation.
Does the ABC not check anything it says about global warming? Nothing. Vanuatu is not drowning. Here are the sea levels there for the past 30 years. The red line is high tide, the blue on the bottom, the low tide, the one in the middle, the average. Can you see evidence of rising seas drowning Vanuatu in this? In fact, the ABC itself, just last year, finally admitted the truth after years of this rubbish. Research showed far more Pacific islands were growing than were shrinking, and nearly half were stable. But here's the ABC yet again, a year on, flogging this drowning islands myth again. Has it no shame? So like I said, I can hardly blame young protesters who hear this stuff, lies, exaggerations. I can't blame them going nuts with worry about the end of the world. And yet, this new breed of climate protesters, there is something now not quite right about them, is there? Now, I don't actually see them acting with genuine concern for other people. To me, a lot of it seems a performance, a kind of bullying. Just look at the climate protesters now in the news throwing mashed potato over a Monet in Germany, falsely claiming global warming will cause mass starvation. More protesters throwing pea soup over a Van Gogh in Rome, or throwing tomato soup over a Van Gogh in London, and gluing themselves to the wall. Others even gluing their head to a Vermeer in Holland, or gluing their hands to a Goya in Spain. They're such barbarians. And then there's a woman who's blocked traffic over a British main road and filmed herself having a meltdown.
I'm here because I don't have a future. And you might hate me for doing this, and you're entitled to hate me. How many more people have to say, we don't have a livable future if you continue licensing oil and gas for you to listen? Why does it take young people like me up on a gantry on the M25 for you to listen?
Something a bit weird there. To explain it is psychiatrist and writer Tanveer Ahmed. Tanveer, thanks for your time. Look, I look at these protesters and I think, looking at you, I don't think you are trying to save the world. This is really about you. What do you think they're doing? Like that woman in that video just there.
Look, the protests and the resistance is getting nuttier and nuttier, isn't it? And look, I'd call it almost types of eco-terrorism. And the reason I use that term, often what happened in terrorism is this mingling of personal resentment with some sort of political ideology of resentment. And I know some people have used the term narcissism, and it's not entirely the worst word. Often underpinning narcissism is some type of humiliation, and it's some type of sense that your life hasn't quite gone the way you would have liked. But you're looking for the answer externally. You're constantly needing some sort of validation externally. And that's sort of partly what's going on here. You've got lots of people whose lives have probably not gone the way they want, and they've latched onto some sort of ideology that casts blame on the world around them, and there's an alarmism, there's a religious zeal associated with it, there's all these sin and redemption qualities. And the art thing isn't as nutty as it seems, because it is almost symbolically, it's almost an attack on civilization. It's almost this anti-civilization attack, that we're anti-industrialization, modernity, and we're protesting that. So it's not as completely nutty as it might seem. There is a symbolism to that.
I think you're probably right, but the reason I'm drawn to the word narcissism, but you're the psychiatrist, I'm not, is even what you're saying, it is about them, you know, it's about their dissatisfaction with their own lives, their will to power, their will to be noticed. The performance, side of all this too. Look at me, and the studied, meltdown. I mean, that seemed to be an act. There seemed to be a lot of it. You must admire me, and I am entitled to interfere with your enjoyment and with your use of the road and with your looking at a painting.
Well, that's right. There's a real performative sort of victimhood going on. And you're exactly right, how much is this actually helping people? You look, and I actually think the most recent the summit is actually exposing some of this, where you've got all these African nations going, you know what, we need natural gas to develop. And that's how we're going to adapt to any rise in temperature. And meanwhile, you've got all these rich white countries telling, oh, no, you can't do that. And we won't let you do that. And the clips you showed are the extreme version of that. So it is actually built on the authorities and what we'd call legitimate figures. But then we're seeing the extreme versions of that, where you've got people with their own personal vulnerabilities acting out in the name of helping others, when in fact they're harming others. They're harming, people are going to freeze to death because of a lack of gas throughout Britain and parts of Europe. And it's because they can't drill for it, because, partly due to protests like what we see. So go ahead.
You mentioned the performative aspects of the people actually at the conference themselves. And you remind me immediately of the new British Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, who says, oh, look, I'm going to go green again. We're going to ban fracking. And I'm going to, yes, I will go to this climate conference in Egypt and, say, look, we've got to pay reparations. And by the way, he says, I've just signed a great big gas deal with America to bail us out. So they won't go frack for their own gas, but they will import it from America. Total hypocrites. But tell me something else about the people there. How responsible do you think the journalists and the politicians at this summit are, like the head of the UN that I played earlier, saying, the end of the world, blah, blah, collective suicide pact. How responsible are they for inspiring these kinds of protests?
Oh, hugely. Look, I'd compare it to this. Now, there's all this talk about climate anxiety in kids, where, kids, and you saw that clip. I mean, there's an infantile tantrum quality about some of those. But we can't entirely blame them, because they're usually being parented that way. So you have this ridiculous thing where parents are going on about how anxious their kids are, when the anxiety is entirely driven both by the culture and the parents. So this is exactly what's going on with some of these infantile protests. They're the children of a culture, and that culture of the apocalyptic culture, where we're creating this completely disproportionate climate around climate. Absolutely. So rather than have a proportionate response, and that's being driven by the parents of our society, namely these leaders of institutions.
I can't help but notice, by the way, they seem to have a thing about Dutch painters, Van Gogh, Vermeer. I think a Rembrandt was attacked as well in London. I don't know, I'm taking this quite personally. But Tanveer, as a psychiatrist, how do you actually deal with protesters like this? Because when I see this, a guy is gluing his head to a Vermeer, I can hardly go and talk to him with facts and reasons, say, look, when you say the world's running out of food, here's the data. It's not. It's going the other way, in fact, more food. It doesn't seem to be about facts at all. You can't deal with them that way.
Well, this is the problem. I mean, a lot of these people are they're coping mechanisms. You know, they're coping with their own various problems. Look, you need dissatisfaction to drive politics and to drive change, but then it can also reach a level where it's more about them dealing with their own vulnerabilities, if you like, psychological vulnerabilities. And I think that's what's going on for many of the kids you're showing, where they're not finding other outlets for meaningful lives, and they've latched onto these apocalyptic ideas to try and meet their own needs. And the fact is they're not going to meet them. There's a performative quality and they might get some sort of instant reward, but it's not going to give them any sort of lasting satisfaction.
Well, it's all very odd, you know. In the Middle Ages, they might have joined a crusade to liberate the Holy Land or something like that. And the benefit of that for the people who stayed was that they never see him again. And that's the benefit. But here, we've got to live with them. Tanveer Ahmed, thank you so much indeed for your time.